The last of the 4 films that I have got in my collection that is somewhat of a 90s golden age comic book adaptation is The Rocketeer. I'd possibly go as far as to argue that this is the best out of the 4 of the films from the 90s I've covered so far, but that's not to say it doesn't have its problems, which are mainly caused by our old friend studio interference. But before I get ahead of myself, let's start at the very beginning. The Rocketeer is obviously an adaptation of a Rocketeer comic book created by Dan Stevens in 1982, which was created as an homage to the Saturday morning matinee heroes who were popular from the 1930s to 50s. In fact, the Rocket Man, a character with a near-identical jetpack and similar uniform, actually appeared in 4 Republic pictures between 1949 and 1953. Interest in adapting the comic to the big screen was almost instant, with Steve Miner optioning the rights in 1983. But Stevens felt his ideas for the adaptation strayed too far away from his own vision for the characters. So the option reverted back to Stevens, who then gave DeMeo and Bilson a free option on the rights, as in his own words, their ideas for the Rocketeer were heartfelt and affectionate tributes to the 1930s movie serials, with all the right dialogue and atmosphere. Most people would approach my characters contemporarily, but Danny and Paul saw them as pre-war mugs. After being rejected by virtually every major studio who had no interest in adapting an expensive comic book movie, they originally planned to make a low-budget black and white independent film using character actors, largely being a complete homage to the Commando Cody serials. They dropped this plan after approaching William Deere to help write and direct the picture. Seemingly, as always when I do these look back at retrospectives, it is that time of the review again. Yeah, massive studio interference in the director, writer or creator's creative vision for the film. And this week is no different. Eventually, Disney agreed to take on the project as they felt the IP had great toyetic potential. In non-studio executive speak, they thought they could sell small children lots of toys off the back of this movie, with Katzenberg, the Disney executive, transferring the film from Disney's more adult-oriented Touchstone Pictures studio to Walt Disney Pictures, meaning that according to Stevens, immediately Betty and anything else adult went right out with the bathwater. They really tried to shoehorn it into a kiddie property so they could sell toys. All they really wanted at the end of the day was the name. They also tried to set the movie in contemporary times, arguing that nobody would be interested in a period superhero film, only changing their minds when DeMeo and Bilson pointed out that Indiana Jones was hugely popular and set in the same time period. Over the next 5 years, DeMeo and Bilson were fired and rehired 3 times, as Disney executives constantly tinkered with the script and demanded something different. With DeMeo saying of the process, executives would like previously excised dialogue 3 months later. Scenes that had been thrown out 2 years ago were put back in. What was the point? With the constant delays, Deere dropped out of directing the film, with Joe Johnston agreeing to take the reins as he was a big fan of the comic books. Finally, after the 3rd major rewrite by DeMeo and Bilson, Disney agreed to greenlight the project and production finally started in early 1990 after 7 years in development hell. On release, the film was a somewhat commercial disappointment, however only grossing $46.7 million on a budget of $35 million, meaning the 2 planned sequels the cast and crew had signed on for were cancelled by Disney. The film did, however, receive a largely positive critical response, with Peter Travers writing in Rolling Stone stating, "The Rocketeer is more than one of the best films of the summer, it's a kind of movie magic that we don't see much anymore," he continued. "The kind that charms us rather than bullying us into suspending disbelief. I intentionally left The Rocketeer to last in this little series because I have never seen this film. Now I have to say this is a bit of a hidden gem of a film." Yet again, the look of the film is perfect. It beautifully captures both the feeling and look of the classic Golden Age pulp stories, as well as capturing the essence of a fun, campy adventure. The story, although fairly simple and pretty grounded by today's standards, is still extremely enjoyable, giving us a little peek into the Golden Age of Hollywood, as well as a feel-good, uncynical, fun adventure. It is, however, a perfect example of a setup, build-up and then payoff script, with all the major plot points having some form of setup, build-up over a course of an act or more, and then a satisfying payoff. The plot comprises romance, action, espionage, detective noir and Nazis, where the good old American boy beats the bad guys and gets the girl in the end, wonderfully blending these disparate genres together. The cast is excellent, with Timothy Dalton especially good, channeling his inner Errol Flynn, as the character of Neville Sinclair was actually based on Errol Flynn, who it was alleged in a widely accepted biography to actually be a Nazi spy, this fact only being challenged after this film's release. Alan Arkin and Jennifer Connelly are also excellent in their supporting roles, with Lothar looking like he was ripped straight from the pages of a classic noir detective crime pulp fiction. There are some great flying action scenes that still hold up even 30 years after release, with the composite shots sometimes being noticeable but largely still very watchable and exciting. The score by James Horner playing over it all is also exceptional, holding the film together, being entirely appropriate to the film. But the film isn't perfect and does have its problems. Chief amongst those being the choice of Billy Campbell as the lead. A bit like Billy Zane last week, although he looks picture perfect for the role, he lacks any on-screen charisma or gravitas as the central character, as Billy Campbell is not a great actor, possessing the on-screen persona of a wet lettuce. It isn't a major surprise he never went on to have a huge Hollywood career, and that is probably why this big budget franchise starter, largely like the others, failed at the box office. Just didn't have name recognition for its stars, with Connolly being somewhat recognisable but not a true A-lister, and Dalton too being well known without packing true pulling power at the box office. The property of the Rocketeer was also a fairly obscure property to base a film on, so didn't have the fan base guaranteed to come out and watch the film, which in that era was a really important factor in a film's success or failure. It again begs the question, who was this designed to appeal to? As a middle-aged man I love this, but as a teen or a child I can't imagine this would really have appealed that much. I'd also say that goes double for a modern child or teen brought up on a diet of Marvel adaptations. Throw in the somewhat underwhelming marketing that largely promised yet more fedora-wearing swashbuckling that by the early 90s had been done to varying degrees of success in Indiana Jones, Batman and Dick Tracy, and I think this excellent film was always kind of doomed to be a commercial disappointment. So that was The Rocketeer, a great proto-Iron Man from Disney crossed with a very large dose of Indiana Jones that serves up a great, uncomplicated adventure story that even today after 3 decades, I recommend you watch. Like, comment and subscribe because next week we are hitting the streets and meltsploitation.